Title slide text, Eric Fierro. Why operationalizing equity in teaching and learning is imperative. Teaching and learning, achieving the dream.
Students, and we are not really creating an environment that for those students of color to succeed and to be successful. So that's sort of the aha moment to think about what can we do as a department under the umbrella of the BMCC mission and strategic planning priorities. We figure out that this will be the class that we want to focus on, since it has such a broad reach for the students that we can really make a difference. So I, as a department chair, made this a priority, and I put together a core team of faculty members trying to see what will be the best approach to revamp our Speech 100, not only the material that we're using, but also the way we're teaching Speech 100. So we narrowed down on three major aspects that we want to revamp. One will be our syllabus. We want to equitize our syllabus so that the students, especially students of color and students who are first-generation college students, they will be able to navigate BMCC in general, and also this particular course, Fundamental of Speech in particular. The second area I want to focus on will be to create an OER textbook for our students. And the chapters that we want to include in the OER textbook will focus very much on equity, inclusion, and racial justice under the umbrella and the theme of public speaking. And the third aspect is to infuse culturally responsive pedagogies and anti-racist pedagogies and trauma-informed pedagogies to really change the way, pedagogically speaking, how we teach the content. So those are the three main focus. Oh, by the way, also one of which is to also include the digital side of enhancing our learning and students' learning in these Speech 100 courses and sections. So we got together, with the collaboration with our partners, we had the funding to really support this particular endeavor, which wasn't supported by the colleges because of the budget crisis, enrollment crisis, and all that. So we are very lucky to be able to pay the adjunct faculty members that we need to heavily rely on to teach these 200 sections of public speaking courses. And that's a big deal breaker, is that if we cannot get buy-ins from adjunct faculty members, we won't be able to revamp what we teach in Speech 100. And I do see that as an equity issue if we do not compensate our adjunct faculty members for their work to really change the way they teach this particular course. So that is how we started. And I know that I'm taking a little bit too long. I will give you particular examples on how we did it, or we are doing it right now as we speak, and how the specific approach that we do inside the classroom and how we revamp the way we teach Speech 100 in particular. Thank you.
Thanks, Vincent. And then James, would you share how you came to the conclusion that this work was imperative, and how your institution engaged in this work?
Yeah, so at the Community College of Aurora, we had the opportunity for the Center for Urban Education at the University of Southern California, which was founded and led by Dr. Stella Bensimon, to come and actually implement the equity scorecard with us. And that was great because they were able to help us really make sense of a lot of the data that we were finding. So just some sort of quick background of what they do. They don't come in and tell us what we're going to find, and they don't tell us what we need to do when we find it, because they would argue that the context of your institution matters a lot. So what they ask us to do is to really—
A person in a small window.
Study the context of your institution, and to do so with a race-conscious lens. And so, for example, starting out with data, and we took a look at disaggregated data of the entire math sequence. We had 4 math courses in the math sequence, and we could see the success rates of each broken down by race and ethnicity, we could see the proportionality of where students placed. So at our particular institution, Black and African American students were very much overrepresented at the lowest levels of developmental math. And as you go up to the sequence, you start to see that number decrease. So not only were we seeing disparities in outcomes, but we were seeing disparities in terms of, where students were placing. And that was a very overwhelming kind of feeling to see that, and just thinking, how do we take this on? It's just, what do we do? But working with them, we were able to figure out, well, how many students does this mean? Can we actually put a number on it? And when we did that, we actually found we're talking about less than one student per course per semester for the most part. So that allows us to take and actually think about individual students. Another thing that was very important was the idea that when we actually took a look at the data broken down by individual instructor, we found instructor for whom these disparities didn't exist. And we didn't know that. We didn't know who the instructors who had inequitable outcomes. I certainly had inequitable outcomes, but we had instructors who didn't. And so that crystallized in our mind that we're not talking about needing to invent anything, that the solutions for this already exist, and they exist within our institution. And so that led us to doing inquiry of things like sitting in classrooms and doing observations, doing syllabi review, deconstructing assignments. So we spent a lot of time of studying each other, sitting in each other's classroom, looking at each other's practices, and we spent a lot of time in talking about individual students. And so we may have found something along the lines that, one of the most powerful examples was, the Community College of Aurora primarily serves two school districts. One is predominantly Black and Latinx, and one is predominantly white. And we invited the math coaches for those districts to come and talk about how they actually teach math. And they teach math in very, very different ways. And what we found is that the way most of our faculty taught aligned with the white school district. Not only that, but our faculty tended to be very dismissive of the way the Black and Latinx school district taught, very judgmental of it. And so if you can imagine the impact of students coming in, what seems like something that's race neutral, it was Black and Latinx students who are more often hearing from us, you should know this already. When what we were really saying is, why don't you know how to do it the way I know how to do it, right? And so what that meant for us is that we were able to study the way the school districts taught. We were able to adjust. So this is what I mean by the context. We really had to understand the context. And what we found was that the students who were coming in, that we were creating the narrative that they are underprepared and they don't care about college, all these things that we say, we were finding that we just didn't know how to teach them. And when we started to learn how to do that, because we're talking about one student per course per semester, which when we do it that way is not an overwhelming thing, we were able to get some pretty significant changes, not just in terms of outcomes, but also in terms of when faculty start to feel like they can reach students in ways that they haven't before, then they feel a sense of empowerment. The sense of fear changes to a sense of empowerment. And then the whole world opens up in terms of what you're willing to do in terms of studying yourself and changing your practices and what you're willing to do to help students.
Thanks, James, for sharing that. So we're going to take a couple of moments and I'm going to turn it over to Vincent. We're going to share some evidence-based instructional practices and digital tools that enhance student learning and equitable outcomes. And so Vincent's going to share how he's using these culturally responsive digital tools and technology to address equity within the courses that he's overseeing.
Text HCOM Ray Keith, Vincent, he/him, B, M, C, Ray in front of blue wall.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen so that you can take a look of the equitized syllabus that we put together. We put together templates so that faculty members can take this as a template so that they can tweak it how they think that will be useful for them. I hope that you can all see my screen. So this is the revised template. A lot of what we had before only served the purpose for the institution such as BMCC so that they are hitting all the required elements without having any legal trouble for our students. So it sounds very legalese. So we try to change the language. We're trying to make it more accessible. We also trying to set the tone right from the start with a land acknowledgement statement, also the mission of the college. And then we make it a little more colorful with quotes, with pictures, with speakers of color to somehow really make this as inclusive as possible. We set the tone also with our introduction of the faculty members and how they see themselves as an educator, how they want, we are here to help our students to be successful, and how we teach our class and what will be our priorities. And for me, I made it very clear, equity, inclusion, and racial justice will be how they should frame all the presentations and how they should start thinking about what they're doing in this particular course. And I'm going to go very quickly to one particular assignment that I do. And I do think that this is something that can be used in any courses. And this is just a very, very nicely and meaningfully prompted introduction. So the first assignment I ask them to do is always this who am I assignment. And I guide them through the process of selecting any questions. So there will be 2 questions from each categories that I want them to hit. One area is their names, one is their identities, one is their values, one will be their goals. And these prompt questions and these prompts will really help them think very clearly what I would like them to share. This usually will be either the first day or first week of the class. So for names, for example, what is your given name? Who gave you a name? Why do you dislike your name? Prefer name, other name. So in a way, I'm trying to bring in the cultural aspect, the linguistic aspect of just in their names and how they can somehow share with their fellow classmates of who they are just by picking and choosing the questions they want to answer. I do think that the second one is the most culturally responsive prompt that I can have to ask them to really think about their identities, to share their lived experience, to really think about the impact of stereotypes that they have experienced, whether or not they got into any conflict or trouble because of their identities and why. So that will be a very easy prompt for them to start sharing a lot of things that they might have experienced that other students might not be aware of, that I want them to start from the first day to be able to share that and also be able to listen to that experience. Then the values and the goals, of course, you will see not only differences, but also commonalities that these students share. So I want them to, at the same time, acknowledge the cultural differences, but also to really know the commonalities and the similarities that they do share that they can somehow relate to. So that to me is an exercise that can be easily translated to any other all the other courses. The second assignment now that we really do
Text, information area 2, identities.
As a new way to teach Speech 100 is to start to have group project that not only just to talk about or develop any topic for informative speech. For our cohort, we want them to start thinking about their community as a place for them to do their exploration and research. We have seen a lot of data on how first year is the most important year to decide whether or not someone is going to be successful. Actually, the first 6 weeks will determine that. So what we're trying to do is to infuse the first year experience into, or orientation, so to speak, into Speech 100, because this is one of the first classes that students will take. And at BMCC, we don't have a required orientation or first year experience course for our students. So we trying to fill that void. And I do think that this is also a good way for these students to get to know their campus. In this particular case, we asked them to do research on as a group, one of the support services or support programs here at BMCC. So they get to meet the staff, they get to interview them, they get to know who are the students benefit from this particular program before and do a report as a group in the classroom. So with 5, 6 different groups, you get to learn 6 different offices already, just with that particular presentation. So again, that's sort of infusing the first year experience into our Speech 100. The last one I want to share very quickly will be, we are trying to use digital platforms such as StoryCorps to help our students to scaffold their speech in such a way that will create a podcast program at the end of the semester. So we scaffold in such a way to listen to one of the podcasts, and then we want them to model how they form their topic sentence, their purpose, and the interviews that they have done to put together this particular podcast. And then they start from scratch of their own project of who would you like to interview, how you're going to put that into an outline, how you're going to then transform that into a podcast segment, and then they upload. And this is a community voice, the stories that might not be heard in the mainstream discourse, because our students' stories tend to be neglected or somehow marginalized. So we want them to feel not only that this is an assignment they do, this is also an archive for their own stories that can be heard and can be shared with a greater community through the StoryCorps Connect. So that is the digital side of it, and we're trying to make that something students will find meaningful, something that they can bring with them as a portfolio as they're applying for school or they're applying for their jobs. So those are the 3 things I can share with you at this point.
Right. Thanks, Vincent. I really appreciate how you're being intentional about bringing in the student voice, also their lived experiences, and centering the students in this digital tool and being able to use technology to support them as they engage in your class and really providing them a way to have equitable experiences. We did have one question about the syllabi and how could this be incorporated in STEM courses? How could someone translate this work into STEM?
The person smiles.
And I know that's not your area, Vincent, but
I think James probably would know how to do that.
The person covers his mouth.
Yeah, I mean, I can share my syllabus if we're going to be sending out opportunities, but you know, there's a lot of narratives around science and math about what they are, sort of what the culture is and how they have to be done. And I think, you know, I got to the point where I sort of started just experimenting. People say that you have to have all the rules down, you have to have structure, you have to have all these things. And I was like, well, what if I just take all of them out? What's going to happen? Are things going to fall apart? And they didn't fall apart. And so my syllabus is, it's much more just sort of very broad. It's just explaining this is what the learning process is going to look like. This is my role. This is how I'm going to support you. You are going to be the most important thing in this class, which means that if you have any question at all, I'm going to answer it, even if that means we don't complete everything during the day, which is a narrative that math faculty keep saying, which I don't have time for this because I have to get through the content. And so that was sort of the experiment of it. And just trying to approach students in a much more humanized way. And what I found happens is you have to make sure that you do establish routines. The syllabus doesn't necessarily establish routines. It may name routines, but it may not establish them. The routines have to be things that students buy into, that they feel it's not busy work, that they actually get value out of it. There's got to be feedback. I mean, there's got to be all these things that happen to it. But I found that investment in the very beginning of the class, as Vincent was talking about, the first 6 weeks, an investment in time and energy and just slowing things down and working with students pays dividends in ways that makes the class work really, really well for the entire semester.
Great, thank you. And Stephanie, you had an example you would like to share in regards to using digital tools and technology.
Yeah, if we can, Eric, if you can just put up that next slide there that I had for implementing evidence-based instructional practice and digital tools. So, you know, one of the things that came out in, I did a study inspired by Ladson Billings' Dream Keepers. I did Dream Keepers at the Gate at the, community college. is, just sort of like what's in your mind affects all aspects of course design and facilitation. So Ladson Billings talks about these common conceptions about education and shared visions for students. And I think, our other panelists talked a little bit about some of those dynamics. Well, one of the things we did is we had a small group with Gateway English 101, 102, just go through an experience so that we could get ready to make that experience better for everyone or available for everyone with models and with examples. So just with our small group that did a course redesign where we intentionally, applied equity pedagogies and digital technologies, we saw immediately in the data that students were having a more positive learning experience in terms of how they perceived the learning experience as more relevant to their interests and what they care about. We saw right away that the students felt more satisfied overall. We even had some more data about their, feelings of motivation. And I really think this comes, largely from efforts to provide access to materials, not only during the class, but also, to use technologies to have a pre-recorded version, also recording parts of the class that you think are relevant, things like that. So again, it shows that caring. So this is an example of, a model where we went through, a process of studying the literature, applying the strategies, pulling out all the stops with digital technologies that we thought would be useful for students. But I think overall, what the students experienced is, seeing instructors that were making it transparent how they created the learning experience and why they were doing the things that they were doing to try to help and support the students. So I think that made, the biggest difference. So now when we move on with this Equity Teaching Academy, we have a model for, I mentioned the Applying Equity Matrix. That's where faculty can develop ideas around the themes that are as unique to them as individuals, but they still correspond with those themes. So they'll create an action plan for their course. Then we have assessment tools they'll use during their course to kind of see how students are responding to different learning moves and, what's clear to them and what's not. And then, assessment post-course. So faculty are going through creating that action plan with the Applying Equity Matrix themes. Then they are, sort of explaining to students explicitly what is the learning experience that we've created for you and why are we doing these things. And I think what that course redesign experience allows faculty to do is take all the sort of things that they've learned about or done, here and there, and then do them all at once in a concerted effort, but make sure you're explaining them all, to the students really well. And so now we've developed that cycle that faculty and teachers from our high schools are going through now, where there is data that shows that it works. There are recommended, strategies and approaches, but people should customize those in their action plans. And then, like I mentioned, we have a course review process where, you can, with a peer coach, go through and determine, how did I respond to, all these areas and sections. So when we send out the ATD materials after this presentation, I'll make sure we have links to all those because I know I'm getting a lot of requests for those tools. But yeah, we were astounded by the data, essentially, that it came down to the people. So it was the hearts and the minds of the people, not specific strategies. And what you can see from even this first small group go round is that students felt that. So I think that speaks a lot to what James is saying, is it's purposeful, that students understand the learning experience you've designed for them. You're coaching them on how to engage, but overall they know that you believe they can succeed and you see education as a public good in which we should provide them with what they need to succeed.
Appears.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. And this is a great transition to talking about how data can support faculty and instructors in authentically engaging in equitable instructional practices. And so I'm going to ask James and Vincent to share how they've used data to inform operationalizing equity within their departments and then implementing culturally responsive, affirming, and validating teaching and learning through the use of data.
So for BMCC right now, we do have an office, institutional research office collecting data, but for the past decades, I've been here for quite a while, I haven't really seen data that is very useful, course specific data that can be translated into some real
Vincent clasps hands.
Initiative that we can go after. So I was
Vincent glances downward.
Pleasantly surprised to have this opportunity to collaborate with the RPP project so that we will have data collection that can be geared towards what we want to find out, and the numbers, the questions that we want to ask in the surveys that we want our students to fill out. So that was last semester. We were teaching Speech 100, 102 the way we have been teaching for decades, and we collected data last fall. And this semester, we revamped not only the OER we have created for our students, the equitized syllabus that we implemented, but also the new pedagogy that I'm going to share hopefully a little more with you. With those, we are going to collect another set of data. And my hope is that we will see a dramatic improvement, especially narrowing the achievement gap.
Vincent gestures while he speaks.
Between our white students and students of color. And I'm in the middle of it, so I don't know what the numbers will look like. I'm hopeful that it will be something that can give us some kind of leverage and support, not only within the department to say that now we have 20 faculty members in this cohort. Next time, we want to expand this to even more faculty members to join us for our efforts to revamp how we teach this class. So to me, as a department chair, the data set will be very, very important for us to convince other faculty members to get on board, to have their buy-ins. I also see this as a way to share with other departments to see whether or not this is something that they can do as well within their department. Hopefully, this will be a college-wide initiative as a result of the strong numbers that we can produce with the data we have collected, very specific data to indicate what's needed and what we can do to change that. So for me, I guess
he smiles.
You guys have to come back next year so I can share my numbers with you. But yeah, we're hopeful.
Ray sits in a living room.
Great. Thanks, Vincent. I think it's really important when we think about collecting data. What data are we collecting? Are we disaggregating data, but also making sure that we're getting the student voice and collecting data in regards to how students are experiencing the change and the way we're instructing them in the classrooms. And so thanks for sharing that, Vincent. James, we have a few minutes, if you wouldn't mind sharing kind of how you've been using data at the within the math department at the Community College of Aurora.
Yeah, and I think it's important. I see there's some questions about the link to get my syllabus. I can put that link in the chat now. I think that should be okay. But I think it's really important to be clear about what role the data plays. And the data that we get.
James Gray looks up briefly.
I think one of the most powerful things about it is that the data can act to contradict the narratives that we hold. So for example, the data that we get that Mr. Bogdanovich is students, he did not have equity gaps within his classes. And so that told us that, okay, well, something's going on with that class. It disrupted the narrative we have that we've got this overwhelming thing that we have to do to be able to address inequities. We didn't have to.
James looks down.
I think it's important to, with the data, that you get down to the actual student level. So again, this idea that for most people, no matter how large the equity gap, we're talking about less than one student per class per semester. And so sitting down and let's just start having conversations about students. I remember doing that with some faculty, maybe in the third week, and having conversations about, okay, who's doing well, who's not doing well. What might we do to be able to address that? And so it can be as simple for some people as just going and having a conversation with those students, which seems like an easy thing to do, but it wasn't necessarily happening in the way we thought it was, meaning that what we thought we were communicating to students was being heard in the way that we were intending it for it to be heard. So just having simple conversations. And I think, other examples of data, I think it's really important to note that, sort of a shortcut way of thinking about equity is that even when our practices are working well, really well for a lot of students, it's not working for everybody. So to have that as a habit of mind. Racial equity looks for racial disparities within them. So even like day by day, looking at my grade records and looking at who's turning in the homework, who's coming to class, how are they doing on it, and looking for patterns within that. And being able to do that very early in the semester so that I'm not finding out that something is happening after the first exam is over, but I'm finding out about it about the second or third week of the semester. One other thing that I wanted to point out, as far as narratives go, it was a very common narrative in my institution that addressing racial equity meant lowering standards. That by the math department addressing racial equity, students will be less prepared when they go on to science courses, when they go on to business courses, all those courses that have math prerequisites. And it was a narrative that was taken for granted. It wasn't something that there was actually evidence that suggested that that was actually true. So we were following students from our classes. We're seeing gains in our classes. We're following them to their science classes, business statistics, economics courses, to subsequent math courses. And we were seeing, for the most part, we're seeing increases in our students' ability to be successful when they go on. And the value of that, like I said, is to counter that narrative that's just taken for granted, that the work of equity means that we're lowering standards and in some way creating harm for students.
James, then Ray in his living room.
Great. And James, just quickly, if you could talk about kind of the implications when we think about sharing data with faculty, what was your experience with that?
I think, well, that was another narrative that I remember sharing the idea, and it was that the provost for one of the universities, and Estella Benson one happened to be there. And I said, I'm going to do this with individual faculty. And the provost said, you can't do that. It's not going to go well. And Estella was like, I think you can do it. And so we did it. And so there's fear with it. It can be hard to see your data, but you know, being able to work with them. Okay, so what does this data do and what doesn't it do? It's really just talking about, for these particular classes, for these particular students, this who was successful and who wasn't. And it doesn't answer any questions, and it only asks us to ask more questions. And so we really had to rely on a process in which we studied ourselves. And bit by bit, we put these, you know, sort of like a puzzle piece together. This is what I saw in the observation. This is what's being seen in the syllabus. This is what I'm seeing in terms of who's turning in homework assignment. This is what I'm seeing in terms of how this assignment was created, and so on. And bit by bit, you get pieces to it that start to make sense to you. Okay, this is why I think the inequities are there. And so, like I said before, the other side of fear is empowerment, right? And when you get somebody to that point, then it's hard to be able to do your job, I think, without actually knowing what that data says.
Ray is in a blue room.
Right. Thank you, James. We're going to transition into outcomes, challenges, and opportunities. So when we think about operationalizing equity within teaching and learning, what does that really look like in practice? What does that mean when we think about transforming the student experience, transforming our teaching and learning, and transforming how students are engaging with those departments, and then really thinking about closing those equity gaps? And so what are some of the outcomes that you faced? What are the challenges? And we want to be honest and share with folks that this is difficult work. And so what do we do when this work becomes challenging? And then where are the opportunities as we move forward?
So if I can start with BMCC, I think personally, as the department chair, one of the biggest challenges, like many initiatives that we have been pursuing, is the inevitable preaching to the choir scenario, that the faculty members who need these type of training and workshops the most are not the ones that were signing on. And the ones who do sign on for these initiatives, these are the faculty members already doing pretty well, and they just need a little bit sort of enhancement. So I do think that it has something to do the time that it would take for us to do this gradually but surely that we need to take it one step at a time rather than thinking that this is going to change overnight. From my perspective, the difficulty will be the faculty members, if they're hired without any of this as part of their quote unquote job descriptions, the pushback can be very difficult to overcome if they don't have the wills and minds and the interest to do what we want them to do with the equity, inclusion, racial justice initiative. Then it's especially those 10-year ones and those ones that already have nothing to show for or to prove. It's hard to get them excited. So I think numbers and data might help for them to join us. But other than that, there's really no either carrots or sticks that I can utilize. But going forward, as a chair department, when we do our search, I will make sure that equity, inclusion, racial justice, or culturally informed pedagogy, culturally responsive pedagogy, and the trauma-informed pedagogy or anti-racist pedagogy will be one of the job requirements. That's what I can do going forward, so that this will be somehow ingrained into not only the department, but also the institution, that these are the things that these are the faculty members we're looking for. These are the way that we would teach our classes. So going forward, I have something that I can somehow foster real changes. Now, at this point, what I can do personally as a chair is to share the data, not only the data that we're doing a good job changing this, but also the data of what we didn't do well in the past with those individual faculty members that I think need help, quote unquote, help the most, and hope for the best that they will see this as an opportunity for them to rethink how they're going to teach these classes going forward. And again, as I said, that there's not a lot of stick under my belt. I can only show them what would be the right things to do, and then maybe a little carrots if I can entice them with the stipends to join the workshop. So that's my experience so far.
Ray.
Thanks. James or Stephanie, would you share your experience in operationalizing equity? What were the outcomes? I know you shared some of the things, the approaches that you put in place, but what were some of the outcomes, challenges, and then what are the opportunities as you move forward?
Well, I was just answering a question in the chat about data. And, the person who posed the question was absolutely right. The first group that we used, to do the course redesign were people who were already in the choir. And we did that more to test and vet the program. Now we've got 24 people from across disciplines signed up, taking that course starting this week and doing the course redesign. But we want data from across disciplines. And you're absolutely right that the data will help us to increase buy-in. So another thing that we've done at Harper is create a new assessment plan in our Teaching and Learning Center with criteria so that we can, go beyond just tracking attendance and find out when you do participate in any of our PD, particularly PD, related to equity. The survey items now have both, checkbox and open-ended prompts, so we can better gauge how many are actually making changes in response to the PD. And then, for the equity programs, we have open-ended questions about, how they've changed their awareness and how they're going to apply these things. So, our essential question is not, are just people showing up, but are they changing what they're doing in ways that can impact the student experience and student success outcomes, and how can we know? So I think, from our first go round of, people taking the Examine and the Reflect course in the Equity Teaching Academy, we had people talking about having a greater understanding of the framing that keeps inequities in place. We have people talking about how, they increase their ease at discussing equity issues in their classes where they're teaching, so and 100% agreed that, they'll apply what they learned, in their classroom or program or service area. So, we're seeing good outcomes. We use the Enacting Equity Course Review tool, which I did attempt to put a link to a Google Doc version of it in the chat, but we'll get that up on our website. We use that to review our longstanding Teaching Online Successfully course series. And then we added pedagogical considerations related to the research in equity pedagogies so that there's more of the why behind the how. And so I think as we increase awareness and build capacity in faculty through all these programs, we're going to continue to see student success. And we did see
Slide text, enhanced assessment plan.
Significant gains in the performance of students in the sections for faculty who did take, that revised version of the courses and that teaching online successfully. For a challenge, we do have, not everybody on the same page in terms of when we do build things into processes and programs, particularly when they're contractual, do we want to center inclusive pedagogy into a rubric or a review tool? So for right now, it's PD, and we're recruiting people to come and we're incentivizing it, with a stipend so that you get PD credit for taking the learning experience, but you can get a stipend for actually doing the work of course redesign and the assessment. And the assessment part is different than what we've done in the past because we're actually going to be tracking with, student survey instruments and also institutional data on student success. So those are some changes that we're making so that we can better answer that question of how do you know? Well, we know based on the student experience, but now we want to have that hard data so that we can increase the choir and get more people to buy into this and make it part of our institution of what people do in their professional development. And maybe one day it does become something that institutionally we agree upon, has value and that we, build into our faculty development processes for evaluation and promotion. But I think we're a long way off because we have to first prove, through this data, which again, someone was asking me about, that we will make gains in student success.
So if I could talk just for a moment about some of the outcomes. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like this was something that happened overnight. This was year by year, very much an iterative process. But where we're at right now, we have about 95% of our students are testing directly or placed directly into a college level math, often with a co-requisite. When we take a look at the ability for students to complete their math within 1 year, so for the students who do enter the program, 75% of them are completing. I can't say that it's equitable outcomes. There are some patterns there that we're still trying to work through, but the disparities that we have are nowhere near what they have. We're literally talking about just a fraction of the student per course per semester now. We have also followed the students when they go on to subsequent courses as well, and they tend to do very well in those classes, often better than they used to do before the redesign for the course. And I think as far as the challenges go to be able to get there, it was a constant challenge to believe that the students that we felt we had experiences with that were not being successful always had what they needed. And it was sort of our barriers that we were putting up and the ways we were asking them to engage. That was the primary explanation for why these disparities exist. It's this idea of being a first generation student that you have a hard time navigating the systems of higher education. And it's not like you can go home and ask your parents to help you out with it. Well, I mean, that's what we went through. We went through a period where we didn't know how to navigate this. And it's not like I could go home and ask my mom, why do I have racial disparities in my classes? And what can I do about it? I was the first generation, as many of us were, first generation equity practitioners. And so it was very much an iterative process, but was the biggest challenge was disrupting the narratives that were so ingrained that we took them for granted and often didn't know that they were there.
Text, Community College of Aurora, Q&A.
We have about 5 minutes left, and so I want to open this up to our participants to ask questions. And I know that there were some questions in the chat. And so just you can come off mute or you can use the chat again to ask questions of our panelists.
So if you want to speak your question out loud, raise your hand actually, because this is a webinar, so you can't just unmute, or use the Q&A function or the chat.
Text Q&A, teaching and learning. A person is visible in the video feed.
There is a question in the Q&A section. I'm not sure if it was answered there by Deborah Armstrong asked, has any research been done on long-term that you know of that you can refer to? I think Stephanie, touched on this, but does anyone know of any long-term impact on equity-based teaching?
I don't know of any articles or research that has done that kind of thing. We have about 10 years worth of data right now.
James Gray's feed fades.
That we certainly haven't published it in terms of a research article or anything, but
Stephanie Whalen is visible.
I did share a little bit about some of our outcomes.
I think it's a huge question, and it really depends on, which theme or aspect or branch of the research are you looking to study. So for example, we did an entire retreat on the transparency and learning and teaching framework, which there is quite a bit of data that shows specifically for systemically non-dominant students that using this approach where you really clarify the purpose of what they're supposed to be doing and the tasks that they need to do to engage in the learning experience that you've designed for them, and the criteria of, coaching them on how to be successful and what that looks like. So I would say that is, an outstanding example of how some of the same principles of culturally relevant and responsive teaching are woven into research that has hard data and specifically targets, minoritized students, but is great for everyone. And then I would also refer to the book, How Learning Works. So somebody's going to post it in the chat, I'm sure, because it's been a very active group. But, that book also talks about how to increase motivation for students through that transparency. So they're really closely connected. But all of these themes that you're seeing, when we talk about humanizing pedagogy, and we're talking about, accessibility, and we're talking about belonging, there's all these different branches. And absolutely there's, research, qualitative and quantitative, that show that applying these principles work. So I think what we've learned through, to kind of synthesize from all the research is there isn't a set
text,
list of approaches for each discipline that are culturally relevant and responsive teaching. It really comes down to the educator's ability to create an experience where students feel supported, feel that sense of belonging, but actually are able to understand the learning experience you've designed. They have a high sense of value for engaging in the learning experiences because their expectancy is high because of the way that the learning experience is created and designed and our interactions with them. So yeah, I would say there's a ton of research, but in order to drill down to what specifically you're looking for, you're going to want to search based on those themes. So that's why even in the Applying Equity Matrix, it's not connected to any specific person's research. When you look at it, it's actually just faculty coming together and saying, these are strategies that really seem to work for my most vulnerable students. Let's list those out. Oh, okay, they developed into 6 themes. Here are the 6 themes. You could pick any one of those themes and you would find, a plethora of research that would support that that's a valuable, endeavor. So I don't know if that answered the question very specifically, but I would point you to those research on the transparency and the how learning works. And there's definitely people focused on higher ed, like Geneva Gay, even though I mentioned a lot Gloria Ladson-Billings, because she was more, earlier grades, but the principles that Geneva Gay and Ladson-Billings describe, those are good places to start for a focus, I think.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. I'd also recommend Dr. Zaretta Hammond, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. She's done lots of research around that, and so that would be another resource that you could definitely look at. So we're at time, and so I want to say thank you so much to our panelists, Dr. Stephanie Whalen, Mr. James Gray, and Dr. Vincent Chang. Thank you so much for sharing your experience as you all operationalized equity teaching and learning at your institutions and within your departments, and really taking a student-centered approach to this practice. And so thank you all for being here with us. We do have a couple of announcements. Eric, if you could
slide text closing,
share those announcements with us in the slide deck. So we have our next Operationalizing Equity webinar on April 12th. That will be a Tuesday, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll be focusing on designing assessments through a culturally responsive lens. And then I'll share some other events that we have that ATD will be providing as well. So here's some upcoming events. We have our Equity Institute, which is March 31st through April 1st, and that's Leadership for an Inclusive Campus. And then we have our Teaching and Learning Institute, which is going to focus on being an equity-minded educator, April 20th through the 22nd. And so we hope that you will go to the events page and register for these events. The webinars series are free, and then you would just need to get registered for these upcoming institutes. So thank you all and have a great day.
Text upcoming ATD events September 14 to 16 Data and Analytics Summit October 11 to 13 2022 Holistic Student Supports Institute Centering Equity and Student Supports February 14 to 17 2023 Dream 2023 February 19 to 22 2024 Dream 2024